Good evening, welcome to TDM Talk Show. I'm your host, Joana Freitas. With us today we have Professor Spencer Lee, Chair of the Department of Sociology of the University of Macau. He has previously worked in the Department of Justice of the United States. Professor Lee is also a member of the Asian Association for Substance Abuse Research, and in Macau, he is part of the Narcotics Control Committee of the AASAR. Professor, thank you so much for being with us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I would like to start for this roles that you play in these committees. You're a member due to your expertise. I would like to know, why did you start researches on the area of drug and youth issues?
I started years ago in the United States, mainly in the correctional settings, in jails and prisons. And I moved to University of Macau in 2010, and I have maintained the interest and have been working in this area since I started my job at the University of Macau about 9 years ago.
You're also part of the follow-up group of the implementation of the law, anti-drug law in Macau. In one of your papers that I had the pleasure to read, you mentioned that the anti-drug law in Macau is a bit lenient if compared to other places. How come? How lenient? Why do you say that?
Well, it's much lenient compared to the mainland China. Although drug use in mainland China is not a criminal offense, but if you become a chronic user, you could get, on average, 2 years imprisonment in China. In Macau, we have only 1 year imprisonment maximum. It's also more lenient than Hong Kong and more lenient than Taiwan. Yes, we have probably the most lenient policy toward drug use. In terms of drug trafficking or drug dealing, our level of punishment is also not that high. The maximum years of imprisonment is 15 years. In China, for example, you could get death penalty for drug dealing.
Do you think that is enough, though? The law we have, is it enough, or it should be a little bit more strong, like in mainland China, like in Hong Kong?
In my personal opinion, our punishment for drug use hasn't been a problem. And we have one of the most lenient policies in the world. Yes, yet our level for drug use in Macau is not that very high. It's actually comparable to other regions. In terms of drug dealing, there has been some controversy about whether we should increase the level of punishment. 15 years imprisonment doesn't seem to be deterrent enough. So some people have argued that we should have a higher level of punishment, and that's open to debate.
You mentioned also the law about being controversial because of the drug trafficking. Macau, unfortunately, is a center for drug trafficking, if not to stay here, just to pass along here. How do you describe the problem of the cross-border consumption and the cross-border trafficking?
Macau has been known as a major transit center for international drug trade. Drugs that come from other regions, for instance, Africa and Southeast Asia, would come here first and then maybe repackaged and shipped to other places, for instance, US, Japan, Taiwan, and area like this. Yes, this could be present a challenge for the government to deal with this issue of drug trafficking. In recent years, there has been an increase of drug trafficking activities participated by youth in Hong Kong, perhaps under the perception that the level of punishment in Macau is low, so the risk is lower. So they would feel safer to come here to dealing with drugs. So that is a concern.
Do you think that the law we have currently helps to, well, it doesn't help to deter because it has been increasing, but do you think it should be the same law for the cross-border, or we should have a specific regulatory system for those crimes across the border? One law is enough?
Generally, you should have the consistent level of punishment for similar drug dealing activities, regardless whether the activity involves international partners or just people doing it domestically. I think this is not that an important issue in Macau, simply because most drug traffickings are related to international drug trade. Very few of the activities are targeted for local users. So on the general level, I don't think we need to make the distinction.
You mentioned the drug users. According to the most recent data from the Welfare Bureau, we have roughly 460-something registered drug users. Do you think that, you mentioned before in one of your papers that the government is indeed doing a big effort to prevent this? Are the strategies used effective, in your opinion?
In my opinion, overall, it's being effective. Despite all the risk factors we have in our society, for instance, we have the gaming industry, we have a large migrant population, and we have prostitution, which is at least partially legal. So we have lots of risk factors for drug use. Despite these risk factors, our drug use rate is not that high, as I said before. It's really comparable to Hong Kong and Taiwan. So you have to at least admit that the policy or all the effort made by the government has been effective.
You also mentioned, though, that there some of the policies brought mixed results. What do you mean by mixed results?
Mixed result, I don't remember the specific issue that I
You're the author of a lot of papers, we should say that. So it's normal.
Mixed result, I would say that the effect is not uniform across different population groups, so different areas. In some areas, it's been very effective. In others, it might not be as effective. As we all know, the Beiqi, we call the North District, tend to have more problems. With regard to different population groups, we have seen overall decline in drug use across the board, yet in some specific groups, like the college students, we found that the rate of drug use has increased in the last 4 years quite significantly.
The last year's study actually mentions that the college students, it doubled the consumption between, right? Why do you think is that? You mentioned the risk factors. Do you think that the more gambling, more tourists, Macau being known as a gambling touristic place, is that, can we have a reason that justifies this?
I think with regard to young people, most of them use drugs because of peer influence. So in our college students, maybe there are some groups starting to use drugs which influence other students. And in addition, the #1 abused drug currently is marijuana. Marijuana, as we all know, has been legalized in many places in the world. That change may have influenced college students in Macau, so they are more receptive to the use of marijuana and other drugs. Yeah.
If it was legalized in other countries, it means that maybe it's not that bad.
Right. Some students even argue that you are so backward and this substance already being legalized but in other places. Why can't we do it here? Why can't we use it? So that certainly has an effect.
I would like to see now the treatment in Macau, the issue of treatment. A lot of you also mentioned in one of your papers, yet another one, that NGOs have pivotal roles in helping the treatment, although the government does not have long-term permanent facilities for this rehabilitation. So, and the NGOs have their own approach. So what do you see, are we treating people, are we rehabilitating people in an effective way here in Macau?
Yes, I think the NGOs play a pivotal role in treatment, but with the support of the government. The government provides, to my knowledge, much of the funding, and also provide policy and technical help. Also set the overall orientation for the treatment. Like in Macau, we actually treat drug users as patients in many cases. So we see them as people with problems. So we try to address their problem, help them to recover and reintegrate to the society. So government play these roles, although government does not operate treatment facilities. Treatment facilities are operated by NGOs. But as I said, under the guidelines, under guidance, under the support of the government, I think this is a really good combination. So government, provide the support, and NGO utilize their strengths to treat drug users, and they contribute to the lack of problem in Macau, in the society.
And then we do have programs such as the methadone program.
Yeah, the government has government has methadone treatment, has clinics that provide short-term help, but for long-term help, the government right now really relies on the NGOs.
Have their role in this also. There's also been a debate including in the committee where you're part of, about alternatives to prison for consumers.
Right.
So here, who consumes drugs also goes to jail. We talked about the law being lenient, but there's decriminalization is not going to happen. What do you think?
Probably not. We're not Portugal yet, although it's being implemented at a high level in Portugal. Drug use is being decriminalized. I think because our tradition, also the fact that we are part of the large social context, we are really part of People's Republic of China, and there has been a strong sentiment against drug use. I don't see the possibility of a decriminalization in short term. In long term, we don't know.
But do you see another alternative for, instead of prison, do you see any other choice?
The government already does that. It's really like the probation program. Well, it's more similar to the drug court in the US. So if you are caught for drug use, under certain conditions, assuming your offense is not that serious, you have often you may have the option to either go to prison or go to a treatment center for a year. And in cases involving less serious offenses, you may even receive the treatment in community setting. So you have two choices, receiving community-based treatment or receiving facility-based treatment. in exchange for imprisonment, if during your treatment you are comply with all the requirements and you successfully stop use drugs, and you don't have to serve time in prison. This is sort of like it's not really decriminalization,
it's a way of,
but at least you don't have to spend time in prison, which can be really detrimental to your social well-being.
Yeah. You also, the social and cultural norms, you've mentioned just now, in a society like Macau. Do you think that there's a relationship between the hidden drug abuse, which is also a problem in Macau? People hide when they consume drugs. Between that and the social environment of Macau, the cultural, also the Chinese culture, if we can say that.
Sure, the culture certainly discourages drug use and also discourages registration for drug use because drug users still face significant social stigma and discrimination. So that would motivate them to hide their drug use behavior. So they don't report, they don't seek treatment. That cultural environment certainly plays a role here. On the other hand, it's also difficult for us to find out how many people use drugs because people don't want to admit their drug using behavior, even though they even when they respond to our survey. Because
which is anonymous, I'm guessing.
Right. And that contributes to hidden drug use. Hidden drug use certainly is a big issue currently, and it affects it doesn't affect not only doesn't just affect Macau, it also affects other societies. Another reason, in addition to the social cultural environment, is the fact that you have so many different new variety of drugs, and people mix things up, which much of that has not been on the controlled list, and it's difficult even for law enforcement to detect this type of drugs. So even they use it, even they got caught, when you take a sample, you try to determine what drug they used, because these drugs have not been on the controlled substance list. So the police may not even detect it. That's part of the hidden drugs as well.
That's another problem.
Yeah, right.
And in Macau, we have the risk factors like the gaming you were saying that influences this, and then on the other side we have hidden substance abuse. And I think it was a paper or an investigation you supervised last year that made an interesting comparison between Chinese parenting and American parenting in related to when it comes to drugs and the effects that it has. I'm curious to know, so there was something about the Chinese parenting control was not effective, but the supervision was deterrent for them to consume drugs. Can you explain a little bit about those differences?
The Chinese parents tend to be high on control, so they monitor their children's behavior very closely. They also try to set rules and punish children if they break the rules. Chinese parents score pretty high in these areas, yet the way they punish children tend to cause problems, because they tend to use like physical punishment, like corporal punishment, like verbal abuse. That actually would cause negative consequences. So control and monitoring is good, but on the other hand, they don't seem to punish children or discipline children properly. The way they discipline them tend to cause negative consequences, developmental issues. So that's the main problem between, not main problem, main difference between the Chinese parents and the U.S. parents that we compare to.
And when we say Chinese parents, we probably talk about Asian parenting normally. I assume, I remember I talked to someone from the Philippines who explained to me the same thing about disciplining through corporal violence.
I think there's a high level of similarities between, among the Asian countries. But the study we conducted specifically examined the parenting practices inside China, mainland China, to be specific.
And I would like also now to go to yet another research. I must say that Professor Spencer Lee has a lot of researches in different areas. We cannot, unfortunately, cover everything, but we are talking about social and cultural norms, and I would like to pass to this most recent study that you presented last month, which is about sexual identity. Your study focuses on this sexual identity, and I think social and cultural norms are also something to talk about when we talk about sexual identity. Do you agree with that? Why do you decide to start this study?
I agree with that. Norms certainly influence cultural identity. You could argue that cultural identity orientation actually reflect the social norm, and the norms, of course, are changing. That's why we see the changes in cultural orientation. The reason we started this issue is actually related to a project that the Social Welfare Bureau asked us to do. So we conduct a survey for drug use among at-school students in Macau. We want to know their level of drug use. We also want to identify all the factors related to drug use. We thought sexual orientation is perhaps one set of factors that would be related to drug use. So we include measures of sexual identity. This is also consistent with previous research demonstrating that indeed sexual orientation tend to be related to drug use, at least at some level.
And that link is related to the oppression that these people feel, or why do we have a link between drug use and sexual orientation? Is it because of the feelings they need to suppress?
We haven't conducted systematic analysis, but just based on preliminary findings, I think there are several reasons for the relationship between sexual orientation and drug use. On one level, people with alternative sexual orientations, like gays, lesbian, and bisexuals, tend to be more likely to experiment with new things. So in that sense, their level for risk-taking may be higher than the general population. So they may be more likely to use drug in that reason. Another reason is exactly what you refer to. It could be the discrimination they experience, the frustration they have, the stigma that they encounter. All that negative social experiences could increase their level of drug use as some kind of coping strategy.
I recall some recent, recent and not so recent studies from Rainbow of Macau, the Association Pro LGBT Community. They mentioned on the last year's or 2 years ago results that over 40% of the people that identify themselves as LGBT say they were victims of violence, either verbal or physical. Most of them hide their sexuality. Do you think that Macau is prepared to have to give the right these people deserve already? Or are we in a non-confrontational society where we don't talk about this?
I think on one hand, Macau is more open than many other societies. Among college students, many people are not afraid of admitting their alternative sexual identity. But on the other hand, socially, because our society is very diverse, we have different groups, people with different socioeconomic, cultural background. And there are people probably have a more traditional moral attitude. So as a result, sexual minority people tend to face discrimination. It's mostly based on moral values, on cultural beliefs, to a lesser extent, maybe religious beliefs. I think we should acknowledge that we are a diverse society, and in order to live together peacefully, and we should not discriminate against people with different sexual orientations or different sexual identities.
There's a recent discussion that happened in the with the student bureau, the DSCJ, the approach that they had to students that identify themselves as homosexuals or gays or lesbians, and the government officials said that they would send students to psychological counselors or to have a clinical diagnosis. That was later retracted, said there was a little bit of a misunderstanding, but there was still a little bit of saying that these people need to be evaluated. What do you think? Are they capable of recognizing what they are when they're young, as I'm assuming not college students, but secondary students?
Right.
Are they capable of recognizing, or do they really need a complement? Because we already got to the conclusion that homosexuality is not a disease.
Yeah.
That's out of the book.
Right. If it's not disease, we know it's not, right? At least based on the best of our knowledge. And what is there to be diagnosed? So I would question. I haven't seen that specific statement. I don't think it's the right approach to send them to psychiatrists or doctors or even psychologists to be diagnosed. These are just people with different preferences sexually. They have different sexual orientations. And as our study demonstrates, and there might be an increase in number of people who identify them, as we call LGBTQ, right? So it's really a social orientation, it's a cultural orientation in the form of sexual orientation as well. So personally, I don't think that's the right approach.
Yeah. You mentioned now the numbers, and I have this. You said the results were surprisingly high of students that identify themselves as LGBT. Why were you surprised?
Because to my knowledge, in the general population of the United States, which I'm familiar with, because I lived there for some time, and the percent of people who identify them as a sexual minority is about 3 to 4%. Despite the fact that the U.S. is a very liberal, very open society. So I thought, this type of orientation among young people may be higher than 3 to 4%, but it shouldn't be that high.
16.5%, right?
16.5% is a bit high. It's surprisingly high, I would say. I actually shared the result with the undergraduate students in my class. I asked them, does this look right to you? And one student, said, well, that's about right. So
maybe they're more conscious.
Maybe they know more. Anyway, it's surprisingly high, but it's not a surprise for the students that I share data with.
Do you have any more papers coming? Are you going to continue to research on that? Or what's the future research and papers that you have to show us, to share with us?
Okay, first of all, I need to finish this paper and also try to identify how sexual orientation is related to other issues. We have attitudinal measures, we have involvement in crime and other delinquent behavior. And there's more we can do on this particular issue. In terms of other research, a few years ago, 3 years ago, we conducted a Macau social survey, which is the first large-scale representative survey ever conducted in Macau. We analyzed the data. We already drafted a book manuscript. The book manuscript currently is under review, so we hope to have that published. And we also conduct research on intergenerational transmission of violence, basically whether violent behavior of parents would influence the involvement in violent behavior or aggressive behavior among their children. We have data from China. We're looking at that. We have submitted a couple of papers for academic journals for publication. Another one is the data we collect for the Social Welfare Bureau, the survey of drug use among school students in Macau from elementary school to college students. We have lots of information there, and we would do some additional analysis to try to uncover the underlying causes of drug use in Macau. So,
as a criminologist, you are a criminologist, have a PhD in criminology.
Right.
Do you see Macau as a lot of areas that can be researched in that area in criminology?
Yes, there are lots of areas that need to be researched. For instance, until last year, we really didn't have any data on crime victimization. We have tons of data from police, from other official sources. But as criminologists, everybody knows that crime is underreported behavior. Police can only get to know that so many crimes. That's universally true, not only in Macau. To have another source of data to verify or corroborate the official data, we need a victimization survey. So we did that in our Macau social survey, but that area still need to be explored. And there are issues with child abuse, domestic violence, and also the issue like what we talk about, discrimination, for instance, against sexual minorities. And all these are important issues to be studied. And other issues that are equal or even more important are the issues with national or international implications, such as human trafficking, such as money laundering. And these issues, I think, are important to Macau, to the stability of Macau. These issues also need to be studied.
Well, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of work to do, and I hope you share that with us. Thank you so much for being on the show with us. That's all the time we got for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, and join us next week for more TDM Talk Show.